Hi, baddies. Welcome back to another episode of Tara's Baddies Club. It has been quite a week. Quite a week. Last week, I got into a car accident. I am okay. I'm just sore. I'm in a little bit of pain. However, I am carless, so navigating that has been very interesting, to say the least. I'm thankful for all my friends that have been there for me, and I've also been connecting with followers of mine to also go to classes. So it's been a time, and I'm just so thankful for all the kind souls out there because I don't know what I would do without you guys. Public transportation in California in the US isn't that great. I mean, it's a little better in New York and the other cities that have trams and subways. Yeah, subways. So it's a little better over there, but in California, we rely on Uber. There's buses. However, the bus takes you hours and hours and hours to get to the location that you want to sometimes. And so I have been so thankful for my friends. I missed my car so much, and I'm going to get through this. But this week's episode is with Danyelle Cedar. She is a survivor of a dependent, and he struggled with drugs and alcohol and I think mostly drugs, but she's going to tell her story. And I'm so excited to have her on today. She was going to be on Survivor Squad, but I don't know what's happening with that for the moment. So might bring that back or might not. But those episodes are still out there, so check them out. But let's welcome Danyelle Cedar today. Hi, Danyelle. Thank you so much for coming on. I'm so excited to have you today. I know we connected a while ago and you were going to come on Survivor Squad, but then life happened, fires happened. I stopped doing that podcast, might bring it back. Don't know what I'm doing with that, but I have this one now and I'm excited to have you on today. So, welcome.
Thank you for having me. I know it's been, well over a year. And yeah, we had talked about Survivor Squad before, but we're finally making this happen. So I'm so excited.
Yes. So I just finished your book, Dear Thomas, last night. You just told me you're working on your second book now.
hmm
And so we're going to get into your first book today. And for the people that don't know you, tell me a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm originally from California and I moved to Maui when I was 21. I built my life in Lahaina and that's where I met Thomas, and that was 6 years of my life. And so when that ended, I ran away to Costa Rica for 6 weeks and I wrote my book about what it's like to be in love with a drug addict. So that was heavy. And then after that, I was still living in Maui when the Lahaina fires happened in August of 2023. So since then, I have relocated to Haleiwa on the north shore of Oahu. So I've been here for just over a year now. Maui is my home, though. So I will be going back to Maui as soon as we can rebuild.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Now, your book, Dear Thomas, talk about your experience and your story for anyone that might be dealing with an addict. I know that it's going to really speak to them.
hmm So I met Thomas when I was 21 and we were friends for a couple of years, and we started dating when I was 23. And when I met him and when we first got together, he was sober. He had struggled with drugs and alcohol before in the past, but by the time I had met him, he had been sober for a couple of years. And so I knew who he was as a sober individual. And then unfortunately, he had relapse. And someone who, sees a loved one, whether that's a family member or a significant other, when you see them relapse after you already knew who they were, you can't help but not let go of the person they were before the drugs and alcohol came back into their life. And I feel like that makes it even harder than to say if you met someone and they were fucked up or using, you would be like, forget this, like I'm out of here. But you can't help but hold on to you know who they are as a person. And unfortunately it was years, 2 3 years of a relapse And he lost everything, his job, his vehicle, his apartment, living on the streets, eventually got arrested, was in jail for a year, and then from there went to rehab for 2 years. And through all of this, I never abandoned him. I never gave up on him. I was so convinced that he was my person. And I was so convinced that I was going to be with this person forever. And so I was determined to fight through the hardest times so then we could enjoy the best times together later. And everybody thought I was so fucking crazy for staying by his side. But, a few years of a relapse is nothing compared to like a lifetime of a life together. And there was a lot of that. And in the middle of that, too, I mean, you lose yourself trying to save someone else. I had put on like 45 pounds of weight. All of my hair fell out. I was drowning in an avalanche of debt, just because all the money I would spend on him or visiting him in jail or visiting him in rehab, because he ended up being on a different island. So I was constantly flying back and forth. And so I really just lost myself. And that was hard. And then he, was in rehab for 2 years. He finally moved back to Maui. We started our own company. We opened an air conditioning company. And then we got engaged. And it was like everything I had worked so hard on not giving up on was finally coming together. And then the blind side happened. And I don't know how I survived, which I don't want to give too much, for the readers who want to read my book, but holy shit, that was the heaviest betrayal and blindside I'd ever gone through. And I mean, at one point, I almost drove off a cliff. It was so unbearable. But I remember at one point during his relapse, I remember feeling so alone. And then that's also why I wanted to write this book, was for anyone I wrote it for the loved ones of the addicts. So if you're in love with someone who's an addict, whether that's your sibling, a parent, a child, a close friend, a best friend, a boyfriend, a girlfriend, like I know what you're going through. And because us, the loved ones, sometimes we have the hardest time understanding the disease of alcoholism and drug addiction. And there is a chapter in my book where I would like to think I explain the disease fairly well. So if anyone struggles with like not comprehending that alcoholism and drug addiction is a disease, there is a chapter in there where I do explain it. And so I hope that is helpful to people. So that's a little bit about the book.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because you've done Al-Anon, you've done the AA meetings with him as well. And they talk about addiction as you're an addict. And another word for it now too is dependent. So I don't want to, upset anyone that may resonate with the dependent word, because we're going off of AA and what they say, So I just wanted to say that just for anyone that's struggling and is dependent upon a substance right now listening to this, like we hear you, we respect you, and we're talking about the other side of what you went through, because that is a huge trauma, and they may be going through something and struggling, but you're like what you go through with that is hell.
When he finally was arrested, that was the first time I got a solid 8 hours of sleep after years of, because you're constantly like, where are they? Are they safe? Are they okay? Am I going to get the phone call that they're dead in a ditch? Like, it's awful. I mean, like I said, I put on 40 pounds of weight. All my hair was falling out. It's absolute torture. And when he finally was arrested, it was the first time in years where I got a solid 8 hours of sleep. Yeah, it's crazy to look back on it, and just the loved ones, what we go through, and anyone who doesn't understand what we went through as the loved ones, all I can say is you're lucky you don't understand, truthfully.
Yeah. Do you feel like there's different levels of addiction as well?
Percent. I mean, with alcoholism and drug addiction, yes, there's different levels. There's some people who have like a little problem, and then there's some people where you're like, how do you still have a pulse? And that's who Thomas is. He's one of those addicts. Like, how are you still alive? Not to be disrespectful, but we call those people cockroaches, because no matter what happens, They just don't die. But myself, I don't have a problem with drugs or alcohol, but I have my own addictions. Like I was addicted to love. And then specifically in our relationship, I was addicted to proving people wrong. Like, no, I'm going to stand by his side and I'm going to show you like it's worth it. You know, everyone's saying like, oh, you got to fight through the hard times to enjoy the best times. Like I was going to prove people wrong. And I was also addicted to the feeling of being needed. I made Thomas's life manageable. And that is something that loved ones have to understand is they don't hit, as long as you are making their life manageable, they're not going to hit rock bottom. You have got to let them go and let them hit rock bottom. So I did that for a long time. And when he finally got arrested, I was like, okay, thank God I don't have to like be a part of his life or his addiction right now. Like he can go get clean in jail. But then afterwards, even after he got clean, I made his life very easy. It was his dream to start an air conditioning company. I had that up and running in 3 weeks. And that was something for me. That's a part of my codependency is I enjoy the feeling of being needed. And that's something I'm working on today is trying to let that go. Like I don't want to be needed by anyone. In my new relationships, I want to be wanted by somebody.
See, I can struggle with that as well, but I've talked to so many different therapists, experts out there, and a lot of them aren't a fan of the word codependency.
Mhm. Yeah, that is a
And
word
because they,
I struggled with. Yeah. Because I'm a
yeah,
very independent person. Like I have my shit together. Everything I have, I've done on my own. I'm also a hyper independent woman, and that's from childhood traumas too. Like I can't rely on anyone, so I just do everything myself. I don't ask anyone for help. So with the word codependent, people were always throwing that in my face, and I would get so defensive because I'm like, I'm not. All I was hearing was the dependent part. I'm like, I am not dependent on anyone. I'm a very independent person. And then I was introduced to Terry Cole, and she has a couple books on boundaries. And she explained it perfectly, where her definition of a high functioning codependent, which is what I am, a high functioning codependent, is I am overly invested, emotionally invested in people's problems, what their solutions could be and what their results would be if they do what I want them to do. And it just made sense. I'm just overly emotionally invested in people and their problems and their solutions and results. And that finally made sense to me. And I was finally able to accept the term high functioning codependent. And so I don't get as defensive anymore when someone tells me I'm a codependent. But also, now that I know what I am, now I know how to address it and work on not being so codependent for myself and other people.
yeah, well, I think it's like, gaining your own independence, focusing on yourself, and whenever you start to lean into the other person, because there is those hits of dopamine that you
Mm-hmm.
get from that other person, and especially when you help them, and then you get that rush, and so it does affect your brain like the addiction does, and it's like the brain scans show it's like completely the same. But I also love getting into attachment
Mm-hmm.
because it kind of breaks away like the codependency and like the word codependent, and where you lean into have you heard of like the anxious attachment?
I think I have. I feel like I took a quiz about attachment styles. I want to search it in my phone, just in my photos, if I ever took a screenshot of it, because I'm curious. Because I've seen the books also. But here,
Oh yeah, like
you
secure
have an, I
attachment
took the
attached.
screenshot in February 2023. You have an anxious, preoccupied attachment style. I don't even remember what that means, but yeah, I have the anxious, preoccupied attachment style. Your fear of
Okay, I love
abandonment
that.
getting in the way of you forming healthy relationships that last. Your fear of abandonment. Yeah, that's very true. I need to look into this again.
Okay, it's because something I really saw in your book
Mhm.
is the fact of the generational trauma, and the attachment stems from literally when you are born, the womb and everything, and how like your mom's energy and everything when you're born, like do you have that constant affection? And if you don't get that secure quote unquote love, and like I feel like no one really is secure out there. If they are, they have been graced by like anointed gold or something.
Right? It's like 1% of 1%.
Yeah, yeah. And so a lot of us go into your attachments. I see you just being anxiously attached and like, getting this love and reaching for this love that you deserve and that you want because you are so lovable yourself and you are so there for the other person. And that kind of goes into codependency, but I like to say like anxiously attached
Mhm.
because it kind of takes away the stigma and the shame around like codependency.
Yeah, yeah, there's such a negative, like, aura around the word codependent, yeah. So I like your
Yeah.
process on that too, but yeah, anxious attachment.
Yeah. But and then I saw him being avoidant, and
Mhm.
it was weird because anytime like you would get too close, that's when he would pull away. And it was like, okay, the one person that was quote unquote working for him was far away in a different state. It always worked for him when like someone else was in a other state.
Mhm. Yeah. Wow, I'm kinda, like, mind blown. I'm like, I need to read these books on the attachment styles because I love that you noticed that as you're reading it. Obviously, the different characters and the different attachment styles. That makes so much sense.
Yes, but I think it will give a lot of clarity and just like a lot of because it's helped me with that.
Mhm.
And whenever I get anxious and then I go after avoidant, they always go further and further away. And with his addiction, it just made things so much more amplified, you know?
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing. I'm
Yeah.
definitely like, that's probably what I'm gonna do the rest of the week is read these attachment styles.
Yes. But you have done so much work on yourself already. What have you tried therapy wise? What have you done? I know you tried Reiki, you've done that.
Yeah, Reiki therapy, I love, and anyone who hasn't done Reiki and is interested in it, just go in with a complete open mind. Do not go in with any expectations because anytime I do go into a Reiki therapy appointment, I come out like completely mind blown or something that I 100% would have not expected to get out of that session. I always feel so calm and at peace and unfuckwithable for like a solid 3 weeks after a Reiki therapy like session. Like you cannot mess with me after I've gone to Reiki. I also love sound healing and breath work. Breath work has also been tremendously helpful after the Lahaina fire. That has helped me a lot. And then a good old kickboxing session, just punching out everything, just imagining anyone's face you want on that punching bag. Oh my gosh, kickboxing is such a great way to get anything out. And if you can't get to a kickboxing gym, vacuuming or scrubbing the shit out of your floors is a good way. Anything just to get the energy out of your arms. And then solo travel. That's another form of therapy that I did. I mean, I went to Costa Rica for 6 weeks to hide out in the jungle and write Dear Thomas. And then a year and a half ago, it was before the fire. It was right after Dear Thomas was released. I went to Europe for 6 weeks by myself also. Just being by yourself, like after any sort of trauma, but also like betrayal and blindsides from another person, especially someone you've invested so much time into, you really got to flip it around and invest all that time and energy and love into yourself. So, a lot of alone time, and then, of course, a lot of writing and journaling and finding things that I guess benefit you, like that actually bring good and like education to yourself. Like, for example, after the Lahaina fire, I can't stand listening to the radio because I constantly hear advertisements for like lawyers for the lawsuits and the class action lawsuits. I don't want to listen to it anymore. So I don't listen to the radio anymore. I literally only listen to podcasts, and obviously podcasts, like this. And it's like someone listening to this might need to read a book because they're in love with someone that's an addict, or someone needs to read the attachment styles book. So listening to stuff where I can gain or benefit something from it.
You know, and then you went through such a heavy trauma after this all, after you finished your
Mhm.
book and everything. You go through the Lahaina. Can you talk about what it was like to go through and yet and
Yeah, because I will say it was maybe 2 or 3 weeks before the fire. I remember I had just gotten back from Europe, and I remember sitting in my room, and I remember finally feeling so content with my life and being so content with being by myself and being single. I mean, that took a long time to finally feel so good. Like, I love my life. And then the fire happened, and everything that you loved and worked so hard on being comfortable with, like, just everything is taken away in an afternoon. And it was so confusing because I watched the fire for 3 hours before I had left. And the only reason why I left my house was I had my 9-month-old godson with me, and I knew there was going to be smoke blowing in our direction, and I didn't want him near the smoke, but I genuinely did not think my house was going to burn. It just didn't make sense because of the direction of the wind, and I had been watching the fire for so many hours already. So I left just to get my 9-month-old godson away from the smoke, genuinely thinking I was going back home the next day. I did not get to go home. I did not go to Lahaina for about 7 weeks after that, until I was able to go to my property and sift through the ashes. My roommate was missing for 2 months before we got the knock on the door that what was left of her, 9 pounds of bones is what was left of her. And when they were finally identified, then they were legally allowed to contact us. And that was hard too, because, you hope for the best, but when someone's missing for so long related to a disaster like that, it's really interesting to be put in the position that you have to decide that they're gone. Like, no one wants to do that. Like, if anything, you want the authorities to knock on your door and just tell you. But it's really weird to make the decision yourself and just accept that they're gone. And so it was 2 months before we got that knock on the door. And the entire time waiting for that, it was constantly like looking over my shoulder or looking at the person down the aisle in Target, be like, is that her? Or you're driving on the highway, and if you see someone walking, you're like, is that my roommate? Like, I was constantly looking for her until I got the knock on the door. I could finally stop looking. So that was heavy. I mean, yeah, I lost everything, my house, my job, and a loved one in my house. And so that has definitely been very, very traumatic. And like I said, the breath work has helped me the most with the fire as far as like my trauma and healing for that. So, and it's hard. Like, I'm grateful to be in Haleiwa. It's a beautiful place to heal, but it's not my home. It's not my home. I don't have my community. I'm just trying to survive. Um, and so even in the last few months, because it's been over a year since the fire, but it's like, okay, I found shelter. I got a job again. I'm surviving, but emotionally, it is freaking hard. It's freaking hard to have your entire community taken away from you.
yeah. Well, and then what I see you go through is living in this constant fight or flight. And it's like
Hmm.
when you get a chance to settle down, and it's when you go and travel and finally are in a safe spot, your body's like allowing itself to heal then and be like, okay, I can rest now because I'm away from all the madness. And I feel like your whole life has been this constant state of fight or flight with even your father.
Yeah, it really has. And I cut my dad out of my life. Gosh, I think it was coming up on 7 years. And my life is that much more peaceful without him. And it's kind of interesting. He did not check on me after the fire. Like, it's one thing for you to send a message like, "Hey, I know you hate my guts, but just want to make sure you're okay or glad to hear you're still alive." No, nothing. So it's another level of abandonment, that's for sure. But I am proud that when I finally cut him out of my life, I finally did it. And like how I just said, like my life is that much more peaceful without him. I don't want to picture what my life would be if I still had a relationship with him. After everything I've gone through, like with Thomas and then the Lahaina fire, like I can promise you my dad wasn't going to bring anything positive to the table in those already heartbreaking events that I went through.
Yes. And then you got super close to Thomas's family as well. And then there was a lot of loss with that.
Oh, yes. And his dad specifically, his dad is an amazing man. I loved him. He was the father I never had. And him and I got so close. So when Thomas did what he did to me, and his dad, was stuck between a rock and a hard place, like at the end of the day, Thomas is his son first. I reminded him he still has a son because of me. Like, I saved your son's life. That was being abandoned again. And I had let him know, not lightly, I let him know, congratulations, you're the second father to have abandoned me. And yeah, that was hard. And anyone who's been through a divorce or any breakup knows what that feels like if they become so close to the family. Because that's the whole point of also like being in love and being together and getting married is you're a part of the family. So you don't just lose your significant other, you lose the entire family. And yeah, his dad and I, that hurt really bad.
Yeah, I can't imagine. And just going through the loss of everything and then going through so much, but you've done so much to even rebuild, get
Mhm.
together. You've done your book, you've done so much, and you have like this family. Something I saw in the book too is that you have so many people around you that genuinely love you and want to support you and we're there for you. And you could literally go to anyone's couch, and I'm not that type of person to be like, I just like, I'm gonna go to your house and like I am like, no one wants me here, no one wants to see me. And just like, I was like, oh my gosh, I want to live in your life with your friends. Your friends seem just amazing.
They were, especially during that time where, yeah, like I went couch surfing for 4 months, after the breakup, where a huge part of that too, and something I was proud of myself, was I had to let them help me, if that makes sense. Like, everyone was offering me their love and support, but I had to let them love and support me. It would have been so easy for me to close everyone off and not want to be like a burden to them, or a bump on the log, or a bump on their couch. Where, because I've always been there for people. Again, like, I have that addiction of like, I'm always the needed one. People come to me because I'm reliable and I can support them. And I don't go to people, I don't ask for help. And so I really had to allow myself to let them love me and support me. And I did. And so that was a huge step for me to even do that. And then recently, anytime I do go back home, or if I think about those times, I get sad just thinking back to the time I spent with them. I was in such a broken state. And I hate that they had to see me like that. Like, I just remember feeling not present because I was so broken. And I've called some of my friends and family and brought up those times or those weeks together. And I just let them know, like, hey, I'm so sorry that I wasn't myself. And all of them are like, girl, no, like, you were going through the hardest thing. But they also say, though, they're like, you held it pretty freaking together. Like, we did not notice you being as broken as you say you were, how broken as you felt. And so that kind of makes me feel good, because I just hate to think, I don't want them to remember me in that state, if there's some people that I haven't seen since then. But no, I was very, very loved and supported during that time, that's for sure.
And I feel like without that, it's harder to heal. And it's good to have a support factor and many support factors Otherwise, you're alone in this healing journey, and it's a really isolating factor without that.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
Yes. And then something, going back to talking about addicts, but whenever I like get dark and dreary, I always like to try to turn around into positive and be like, okay, the next thing's a positive question. But going back to the addiction cycle, going back to the dependence, what are some things that you learned about going through that process? What boundaries do you say you should have for yourself, and what things would you maybe do differently?
Yeah. Well, I look at it as like, yeah, if I ever met someone who was going through what I went through, if you are in a relationship or you're related to an addict or a loved one who struggles with drugs and alcohol, that is not your story. That is their story, boundaries, and you have got to take care of yourself. You have to love yourself. And if that means stepping away, trust me, I know it is not easy. It is not easy. It is so difficult that I wrote a book about it. But you have to walk away. You have to let them hit rock bottom, and you have to let them save themselves because they have to want it. But that's also the catch-22 is the loved one has to want to take care of themselves as well. That I think is what people don't think about is like the addict has to want to get help and the loved one has to want to love themselves again. And so what I have learned is, well, I won't ever do this again. I don't want to say like I'm never going to date. I would prefer to not date an addict or an alcoholic again. Like say if I met someone who's sober and they're like, "Hey, by the way, I'm in the program." It's like you don't want to say like, "Oh, I can't date you because you're in the program." Like, no, good for fucking you for being in the program. But be like, "Hey, these are my triggers. These are my traumas. I've already dated someone. They relapsed. I went down this road. I'm just letting you know I'm not doing it again." So that's what I've learned is I'm not going to be with someone who is actively struggling with drugs and alcohol again. And because I lost myself trying to save somebody. And I hope anyone who has the strength to walk away or step away, you're stronger than you think. You're not a horrible person. And if anyone is judging you for that, again, they don't understand and they're lucky they don't understand.
I agree with that. And I just, thank you for that advice, and thank you for sharing your story, because it's not easy to talk about the things that were hard to go through.
Yeah. I remember sometimes I'd be writing and I'm like, there'd be certain chapters where I'm like, oh my God, people are going to eat this up. And then there'd be other days I'd be writing and I'd be like, who the fuck would read this? And yeah, it's like, it is scary. It's vulnerable. It's like, this is my life. It's one thing to be afraid, like, oh, am I a bad writer? Or is everyone to think my book sucks? But like, at the end of the day, this is my real life. Like, it's definitely scary. Putting your life out there. It's like, people are going to take it one way or the other. Like, yeah, it's scary.
Yes. Well, and it's funny because reading your book, like, it's not a boring book whatsoever. You go through it. I got through it like in 2 days, and it was actually an easy read because
Mm-hmm.
when you're getting into chapters and they're just so long. That's one of
Mm-hmm.
the things that I don't like, and your chapters were never like long.
Right.
So I
Yeah.
was like, I'm going to get to the next one.
Yes, I know it, and I loved it, and I don't think I did that on purpose, but I feel the same way. But also, like, I can't stop a book in the middle of a chapter. Like, you always want to finish the chapter before you close it, and you got to go about your day. But yeah, so naturally, my chapters are only 1 to 3 pages long. I think there's one chapter in there where it was like 13 pages. It was the god awful chapter when we had to sit down and like negotiate him buying me out of the business, which was my least favorite chapter to write, edit, reread. I hated that chapter because I hated reliving it. But yeah, I've had so many people reach out to me and they're like, "Hey, I don't read, but I read your book in 2 days because I made it easy to read." And it's a quick read for sure. So I am very proud of that. Mhm.
And that one, I'm like, oh my God, I'm getting through it. But then I'm
Yeah.
like, Yours was really quick, really easy, and it was like every step of the way, there's something that you can relate to. Even if you were not with someone that was dependent or an addict, you
Hmm.
literally like, okay, you're like, I've been through a breakup before. I've been through business with maybe my ex, I've did this with them, or I gave a little too much of myself into a relationship where the other person wasn't that reciprocating.
Yeah. Yeah. No, there's definitely a lot of relatable topics, and I feel like there was even more, but I had to cut so much of the book. When I first wrote it, it was actually 3 times longer than the final product. I had to cut a lot, but it's not like you're really missing anything. Most of what I had to cut out was other stuff that was going on in my life at the same time of dealing with him. But my editor said, like, no, we just need to stay on topic, which totally makes sense. So trust me, I've lived a lifetime of stuff where I could write about 20 different memoirs. But in Dear Thomas, though, I did want to keep in like my weight loss journey because I blamed my weight gain on him, or the stress that he brought onto my life. I blamed that on him. And so it's years of me losing the weight and then also paying off all the debt. Like, I hope I can inspire someone to go pay off all their debt. And again, that was years. I didn't pay my debt off overnight. It was years. But yeah, I felt like there's definitely a lot of relatable stuff, and a couple deaths happen. Everyone relates to death. So that's in there too.
Yeah, and well, it also interweb with your relationship too, because he was supposed to be there for you at times
Hmm.
and then couldn't. And it was always, he just was so emotionally unavailable.
Yeah, no, for sure. And when you're in it, you don't realize how unemotionally available he was, or like you said earlier, he's avoidant, until when I go back and look at it, it's like, wow, like yeah, you were not there at all for me.
What were some more of the manipulative stuff that he did to you when he was sober? There was a lot.
So the thing with Thomas was, as awful as he was still a better man to me than my dad ever was. And a huge part of that is Thomas never raised his voice at me, obviously never raised a hand, never spoke down to me or in a demeaning way. And that was his way of, that's what made his narcissism so subtle and almost undetectable. It was always his way or the highway. And again, it's like we never got into a fight in fights because he never raised his voice at me. But no matter what, it was always his way or the highway, whether that was where we were eating or what we were watching on TV. If he expressed he wanted something, and if I said, no, we're doing this instead, it's like he would poke and like peck like a chicken or a child, a toddler. And it's like he just wouldn't shut up. He would constantly just be like, no, we're doing this, we're doing this. Or he would just be annoying on purpose, to the point where I'd be like, okay, fine, whatever, because I didn't want to hear it. And so it was like he just made sure he always got his way. Or if I ever wanted to go on like a vacation together, somehow I feel like he would always make sure it didn't happen, or say like, because he knew I was also like financially conscious. And so he'd be like, oh, but maybe we should save our money and, put it towards this in our future. And so we wouldn't go on vacation because it's like he would manipulate me into like, let's save our money for something else in our future, whether that was a wedding or a child or buying a house. So his manipulation and sarcasm was very, very subtle, but it was definitely there. Oh, shoot.
Sorry, I was on mute. He did the future faking thing. It's
Hmm.
actually called future faking. And it's like
Hmm.
where they like are like, oh, this for our future. This one day I'm gonna marry you. Oh, this and that.
Hmm.
I want kids with you. And literally they're planning this with you, but they're not serious about it. And it's just like an emotional manipulation tactic to keep you still there where they can get the supply out of you.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know if I've ever heard that term, but that's 100% what it was, future faking. And that's why I was so devastated too, because it was before my 30th birthday when he blindsided me. And so it was like I had my whole life planned. Like when we were getting married, when I wanted to start trying to have a baby, we owned our own company. So that was like our income and how I could be a stay-at-home mom and not have to pay for outrageous childcare. I had my whole life planned. And yeah, it's a part of that future faking. And so I've just been like, okay, am I supposed to meet someone tomorrow and fall in love, but be with them for an appropriate amount of time to know that I can trust them and build a life with them, like that's hard. And I think every woman does that, especially pushing her late 20s and especially us in our 30s. Like I just turned 33. It's still a fear of mine. Like, am I going to have it? So yeah, future faking. Fuck you guys.
Well, I'm 33 as well.
Hmm.
And it's funny because you have so many things that you want to do in your 20s. You're like, I want to start a family, this and that. And some people are not like that, but I'm like that.
Hmm.
And when I hit my 30s, it was like, oh, none of that happened. What's wrong with me?
Right.
And you're just like, you go a little bit deeper, but nothing's wrong with you. You're just like, your 20s were for your fuck ups and your 30s
Yeah.
are for getting it together.
No, for real. And thank God, like, the human life expectancy is longer than say what it was in the 50s. Like that's why everyone was having kids so young, is because people were dying by the time they were 60. Now everyone's living till their 80s and 90s. And so when I meet women who have children after 35 or even in their 50s, I honestly, I don't ever look at them as old moms. Like to hear it, it sounds like they're old, but when I see them with their child, I'm like, oh, I don't look at them like an old mom. And so they're very inspiring, and it keeps the hope up for me. Like I don't have to, like, the clock, it's ticking, but it's not like rapid ticking. Like there's still time. It's just not what I had expected for myself. And that's another thing I learned after this relationship with Thomas is zero expectations. You live a lighter life if you're not constantly living by expectations, because expectations are just setting you up for disappointment, honestly. So I'm just trying to trust the process. It will happen when it happens and how it's supposed to happen.
Yes, and just go with the flow of life because everything that is meant for you will be in your path.
For sure.
I love it. Well, I think this is the perfect note to wrap up on before we get into the Patreon part, which is extended portion for anyone who wants to pay a little extra for extended content.
Yes.
So, where can we find you on social media? Where can we buy your book?
Yeah, so on social media, on Instagram, it's Danyelle Cedar. I spell Danielle with a Y, not the traditional I spelling. So that's DanyelleCedar. And then I do have an Instagram page for my book. It's called Dear Thomas, the book. And then my book is available anywhere online where you can buy books. So it's on Amazon, Books a Million, Barnes and Noble. It's even online at Target and Walmart.com. And then it's available paperback, hardback, ebook. So on Kindle as well as the Apple iBooks. So available, yeah, pretty much anywhere online where you can buy books. So
Perfect. Lots of options. Well, thank you so much, Danielle. We'll get into the Patreon portion. Thank you for listening to Tara's Baddies Club. Always remember there is extra extended episodes on Patreon. So join the paid Patreon membership and you can see extra content. And then also, if you wouldn't be so kind, I would appreciate a 5-star review and just a review just to give some feedback because it's great to hear feedback from you guys. And I just love chatting and just hearing what you want to hear. So let me know. And until next time, I'm Tara Newell, and thank you for listening to Tara's Baddies Club.